Good morning, folks. My name is Donald Brown. I'm a veteran from the U.S. Army in the 70s, the post-Vietnam era, an era when experimentation began on troops without their knowledge. Experimentation didn't only go on troops, they went on the general public as well. Over the years, I wound up living in a great many countries across the world, 13 actually, but I wound up living in New Zealand for 8 before being deported back here. And what I'd like to do is tell you some aspects of my story and how they relate to you, whether you'd like to believe it or not. This is the truth, and a lot of people don't like to know the truth anymore for some strange reason. Nonetheless, in 1976, there was a president called Leslie Lynch King Jr. Some people think his name was Gerald Ford, but his name. He became president of the United States and installed 2 of his best friends, one Donald Rumsfeld, head of the Dow Monsanto Chemical Company, and one Dick Cheney, head of various companies, as well as Kellogg, Brown, Root, Halliburton, as we all know now, 2 secretaries of defense and various other positions within the U.S. government. These 2 neocons, criminals, war criminals as I call them, effectively handed over the United States government to a wide range of corporate interests and foreign interests as well. As has become more obvious all the time, our country's not really run by Americans. In any event, during the reign of Donald Rumsfeld's CEO and boardmanship over Dow, Monsanto, Surly, and other things, certain things were occurring across other parts of the world that Americans were kept in the dark about. One of those was New Zealand. And to this day, this country is advertised as a clean, green, wonderful place to go, and I'd like to show you that it is the exact opposite, that large parts of New Zealand would be evacuated if we're in the United States, and that New Zealand has served nothing more than a DowAgrosciences, Monsanto chemical company test tube. And what's most important is that what's happening to New Zealand is happening to Maui right now. And this is a fact. We have proof of all this, and that's what I intend to show you right now through a series of documents, official and media releases and otherwise. I'd like to start with a scrapbook of newspaper clippings. This started in New Zealand. A local community newspaper came out in November 2000, and it said the government looks into dioxin problem, and this is in the Paratutu neighborhood of New Plymouth, New Zealand, and these are 2 of my friends, Patty Bird and Andrew Gibbs. My wife at the time went to this meeting when I went to New Zealand. I got married and had a wife, and she had a home already next door to the chemical company. But nonetheless, she went to the community meeting with these 2 and came back in shock, and was not really aware quite of what she discovered, but nonetheless she invited Andrew Gibbs over, who, when she met at the meeting, said, well, my husband's American, and so he thought he'd like to come have a talk to me. He was unsure of what I knew or anything. I did not know anything about the nature of dioxin, the contaminant in Agent Orange, and 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D. I just knew that I'd had a bad flu shot in the Army and it killed most of my friends, and I didn't much care to be in the United States, and I'd fled to what I thought was a safe place on the other side of the world, as far away from America as I could get. Nonetheless, when Andrew came, he'd explained to me that my home next door to the Dow chemical plant was in fact contaminated with something called dioxin. And if you do your own investigation into dioxin, you'll discover just why it's referred to as the most toxic substance known to man. Never mind the nuclear bombs. Dioxin. It's a chlorine-carbon compound. While there's 73 or 75 varieties of it, 17 of these are man-made, and they are not the result of burning natural substances. There are other abnormal activities, only man-made. In the particular case of 2,3,7,8-TCB dioxin, this dioxin is not made from combustion or burning. It is made from the manufacture of herbicides. And this is unique because this dioxin is then applied to the products that we eat, to the roads we breathe on, to our school playgrounds. It saturates every aspect of our life to the point that when killer whales die in zoos in Norway, they have to ensconce the body in concrete as this dioxin works its way up to the food chain and accumulates in apex predators like humans. This dioxin, this chlorine carbon compound, when it comes in contact with moisture, possibly like salt water and blood, becomes radiomimetic. It mimics radiation, the same as the fallout from a nuclear bomb. A nuclear bomb emits a particle that is, it's a dust that is emitting rays, and should this ray go through you, you will die. It will kill your cellular structure on the inside, and you will die of radiation sickness. The dioxin particle emits a ray in one direction for 9 feet. Looks kind of like a centipede without legs, actually, on the atomic scale. Nonetheless, the investigation into dioxin continued. And what they turned up was various politicians and local public officials would call for investigations into the Dow Chemical Company. There would be investigations, and they would be come up clean. They would say there was no problem. Again, no proof of dumps, says the council. I can turn this around so you can see these newspaper articles. There will be accusations of dumping. The council will be divided on dioxin claims. You need to remember, at the time you're looking through this is a community meeting where I'm attending. New Zealand has told the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Australia, you've got it wrong. We are not compensating our Vietnam veterans for exposure to Agent Orange. New Zealand never did. As the investigation into the Dow Chemical Company continued, the media sensation became to get more, the media exposure got more and more dramatic. Then came a call from a lady named Hyacinth Henderson. Here was one of the dumps they denied existing. This is down in the dumps. This is roughly my home right about here. These are all dump sites. This is a dump down the street from my house. This is a rubber-lined lake, and that is 3 men standing in it. That had 80,000 drums, or portion of it, of the Agent Orange left over from Vietnam, put in this hole in New Zealand. Now, in my investigation, I discovered one of the people who buried all these drums also buried drums of pichlorum in here. These drums of pichlorum were put in there without being released. The pressure released on the containers, I learned. These were a ceramic-lined aluminum container. I learned this because I inquired as to the person dumping them what they did about these pressurized containers of pichlorum in the mix with this, and they said they shot them full of holes. And I said, well, if you shot a steel drum full of holes in a lake full of esters and acids, wouldn't that rot the, or poke holes in the rubber liner? And at which point he said, yes, it would. So he said the rust was not an issue because the containers of pichlorum were aluminum and ceramic lined. So that's what happened. What they did when they shot those drums was to create leaks that led down the cliff face into the ocean, and I'll show you shortly. As the residents got angrier, the health ministry backed down and finally consented to blood tests. In 2001, the blood tests were okay. The results of those blood tests took 4 years to get. In that time, numerous other investigations were conducted into dumping, the degree of contamination, and other health effects of people. One thing discovered was people throughout the neighborhood had worked at Dow and remained loyal to the company. Here's Paratutu resident Gabriel Alsop. She says she's here, I can't find the quote, but healthy as trouts. We're all fine, nobody's had any problems here. Now, it turns out Gabriel Alsop's husband was the one who put a seal on backwards on one of the reactors that caused one of 5 Bhopal-type explosions. And it turns out Gabriel Alsop, without her consent, I went into the hospital and looked into her health records. She's had her thyroid removed and breast cancer twice. That's not as healthy as one would say. This is another indication. The type of ignorance that New Zealanders suffered for years was public officials who said it was okay to drink 2,4,5-T. It was that safe. This is an industrial chemical weapons incinerator. This burns 2,4,5-T 24/7, 365. And after numerous complaints of the neighborhood, this 20-foot section of pipe was added to alleviate the smell of burning plastic that permeated over my neighborhood. Many times I broke into Dow, went up here to these technological devices with axes and bolt cutters and sledgehammers and smashed them to pieces in fits of rage. The security guards would only hop in their van and run away, and the police would not even come. Here's the 20-foot section of pipe being added after a neighborhood of 2,500 complained about getting sick for 5 years of burning plastic. Here's another person coming to Dow's aid with what a wonderful garden they have, even though they live next door to Dow as well. But it's absurd. Every one of this woman's plants is in a pot. She is unable to put any of her garden in the ground. She is also a Dutch woman whose husband worked at Dow for many years. This theme continues. This is March 2nd, 2001. On this day, New Zealand Vietnam veterans, backed up by New Zealand school children, broke through the gates at Dow. The police had already removed everyone from the company and protected them, but this is the level of frustration. I might add that although all these people broke into Dow, not one pair of handcuffs was broken out. No arrests. Throughout the news articles over the 8 years I collected these things, you will see constant articles regarding stillbirths and birth defects. Coming up on that soon. Now, October 4, 2001, the very same council officials who had approved Dow's activities in the manufacture of Agent Orange and 2,4,5-T, passed for decades the rest of the world stopping it, are also now in charge of chasing down all the same chemicals that no one's been allowed near on the rest of the world for years. May 19, 2001. Strong statistics backed up by the World Health Organization show a rise in child cancer rates. This rise is hidden here in this news article. If you were to Google Donald Sarton, S-A-R-T-E-N, you may link to the correct child cancer rates in New Zealand. They surpass all the child cancer rates in the rest of the world. Now, the person who shocked the drums to release the pressure in the picklorem in the massive dump let the chemicals leach out the cliff face and into the ocean. That's the end result of that. So I'd like to highlight this article here in the Daily News from New Plymouth. Someone says they were brave enough to drink 2,4,5-T. Your average citizen finds that obscene. Here we are again. You're going to find the same thing in Maui. High-ranking public health officials saying there is no health link to dioxin. Keeping in mind, while Dr. Patrick O'Connor says this, the United States, Canada, Great Britain, England, Australia have all compensated their Vietnam soldiers for exposure to this deadly radiomimetic chemical. Yet the New Zealand people could not, for the life of them, find the link. Dr. Patrick O'Connor concocted this report. Rates of reported illness in Paratutu and Motoroa. This was labeled intentional misinformation by a court. On this graph he shows, as explained by Andrew Gibbs, the cancer deaths in Motoroa, that dot is actually way higher than it should be. This dot would be way down here anywhere else, United States, Israel, Hungary, any other industrialized country with high cancer rates. This spike here indicates that nearly everyone in Motoroa and Paratutu can expect to get cancer. When these people conceal evidence like this, they sentence other people to death. And it is, in fact, a criminal offense. She appeared in the local paper, and as we all know, Erin Brockovich was a wonderful inspiration to a great many people. When your whole town revolves around an American chemical company, it becomes rather popular to the wrong kind of people. Here is the final investigation on the dumps. This is Bill Bayfield. He's been behind the hiding of all the information about all these dumps. It turns out there's 33 major chemical dumps throughout New Plymouth, New Zealand. All hundreds of thousands of drums of chemicals and waste. But wait, there's more. This is Ian McLeod, the Vietnam veteran who drew the map I'm going to show you soon. He states at the end, I dumped the stuff. The person who was running the dump at the time has given you sworn statements. Why are they not in the report? Are you calling me a liar? This is in reference to this report admitting 33 major dump sites throughout New Plymouth and Paratutu being woefully short of dump sites. Dow's answer to this was to round up school children and have them come dig in their dioxin-contaminated dirt around their backyard to their factory and plant 8,000 trees. They have them digging barehanded in highly dioxin-contaminated soil with no gloves, planting trees. Here's another head of the Taranaki Regional Council, Basil Chamberlain. No dioxin scare. There is no dioxin. Well, we're about to see that is not true. This is the table. Residential soil peaks at 2378 TCED. 1985, 86, 98, and 2001. This is what they admit to. They're saying in 2001 we have 29 parts per trillion. PPT, parts per trillion. This is the shellfish dioxin part per trillion wet weight 2,3 contaminant. At Paratutu Rock, the highest dioxin content in shellfish on the planet Earth. Now watch what that resulted in. The New Zealand government had to change the take size for paua, which is abalone. This is the largest an abalone can grow around New Plymouth, New Zealand, and that's your normal size. Brad Daniford's the fish and game officer for the local area. Brad Daniford and his dad also have large amounts of DowAgrosciences shares. This is permanently and genetically altered, the main food source of the Maori people. At the same time that report appears, the Taranaki Regional Council gave Dow a good report.